What would you do if one day you discovered you had a biological child, but couldn't tell which one of 20 children it was? Michael Evans sat frozen in the dark room, his hand gripping an old, faded letter. The dim light from the lamp cast shadows on his face, reflecting the shock in his eyes. The words before him cut deep, like a blade slicing into the past. Michael, one of them is your child. His body stiffened, his breath grew heavy. 10 years ago, he adopted 20 orphan children, never knowing that one of them shared his blood. Outside, laughter and chatter echoed as the children played without a care in the world, unaware of the terrible secret buried among them. Which one was it? Daniel, the sharp boy always asking challenging questions? Samuel, the fragile one with a heart full of strength? Or Adam, the strong yet lonely child? Michael closed his eyes, trying to recall every memory, but it was no use. He had loved them all like his own. But if they ever discovered this truth, would everything fall apart? A strong gust of wind rattled the window, and thunder rumbled in the distance, signaling a storm was approaching. Michael tightened his grip on the letter, feeling his heart race in his chest. He couldn't keep this secret forever, but if it was exposed, what would happen? And what if the children discovered the truth before he did? Don't look away from this story, because what's coming next will shock you. Hit that subscribe button now to join me in uncovering the truth behind this secret. Michael Evans stepped out of the orphanage with a decision that stunned the entire town. He wasn't adopting 1 or 2 children. He was taking in all 20 neglected black children no one cared about. The moment he signed the adoption papers, those who witnessed it exchanged confused glances, quickly turning their confusion into mocking whispers. A middle-aged, single white man who had never been married suddenly wanting to raise 20 orphan children of a different race? They called him mad, a fool who had no idea what he was doing. Some laughed, betting that within a few months he'd give up and throw the children back into the system. But there were others, crueler whispers speculating dark motives behind this strange act. Michael didn't care about the gossip. He walked past the crowd, their eyes filled with disdain, each step deliberate but sure. The 20 children quietly followed, some clutching the hem of his coat as if afraid of being left behind. A few couldn't hide their nervousness and doubt. They were too familiar with rejection, too used to being taken in and then discarded like defective goods. To them, this man was no different from the others who had come before, those who promised a home but left once they realized raising children wasn't as easy as they'd thought. They didn't trust him, and Michael didn't expect them to. He simply led them to his old car, eyes fixed ahead, silent. That morning, as Michael's car pulled away from the orphanage, a group had gathered at the gates to witness this odd spectacle. An old woman shook her head, muttering that no one could raise 20 children at once without losing their mind. A younger man laughed, betting that within 3 months Michael would be on his knees begging to return the kids. Some of the more malicious voices asked, "A single man adopting that many children? Does he really have pure intentions?" Those whispers followed Michael even as he drove away, like shadows that would never vanish. But inside that old car, he stayed silent. He didn't explain, didn't justify. He knew that the gossip didn't compare to the secret he was hiding deep inside. A few of the children sat close to each other, exchanging wary glances. No one said it aloud, but in their hearts, they all shared the same question. Who was this man, and why was he doing this? Michael remained tight-lipped about his true reasons. He knew that if anyone uncovered the truth, everything could fall apart. Then, as the morning sunlight reflected off the car windows, casting light onto his quiet, somber eyes, Michael tightened his grip on the steering wheel. This journey wasn't just going to change the lives of 20 children. It could change his own life as well. But would it be for the better, or was it the nightmare waiting to unfold? He wasn't sure. All he knew was this. From this moment on, there would be no turning back. The first days in the new house were far from easy. 20 children, each carrying their own story, their own unique personality, and their own traumas, made for a house full of chaos and tension. Each child brought with them a past that was marked by pain, neglect, and deep mistrust. They had grown up believing they were unworthy of love, that every adult who came into their lives was there only for their own benefit, and that sooner or later they would be abandoned, just like the others before them. They had no reason to believe Michael would be any different. Michael, however, had made a decision that went against everything they had come to expect from the world. Instead of just adopting 1 or 2 children, he had chosen to take in all 20 of them. He knew the road ahead would not be easy, but he was determined to prove to them that there was something more than broken promises and empty words. Still, he couldn't escape the skepticism in their eyes, the suspicion that hung heavily in the air every time they looked at him. The resistance started almost immediately. Daniel, the oldest and sharpest of the group, was the first to challenge him. The boy had a quick wit and a sharp tongue, and he wasted no time in testing Michael's resolve. On the first morning, Daniel secretly poured salt into Michael's coffee, an act of mischief designed to get under the man's skin. Then he hid Michael's car keys, making it difficult for him to go anywhere. As if that wasn't enough, Daniel boldly declared, "You're not our father. Don't pretend like you care about us." His words hung in the air, cutting through the stillness of the room like a blade. Other children, though less direct, also found ways to express their doubts. Ethan, a quiet boy who was always keeping to himself, managed to break a picture frame in the living room. When Michael came in to find the mess, Ethan shrugged nonchalantly and said it was an accident. It was as if the boy was daring him to get upset, daring him to react. Sophia, the girl who always kept to herself, refused to eat anything Michael offered. She would sit at the table, staring into space, her eyes brimming with unshed tears. She said nothing, but her silence spoke volumes. It was a silence that screamed of years of abandonment and loss. Then there were the others, those who remained silent altogether, watching him, waiting to see how long he would stay before walking away like all the others had done. Michael did not retaliate. He did not scold them or show anger. Instead, he quietly fixed the broken things and cleaned up the messes, never once raising his voice. He knew that their actions weren't born from hate or malice, but from fear. Fear of being abandoned, fear of trusting someone only to be let down once again. Michael understood that they were testing him, pushing him to see if he would give up like the others had. But he wasn't going anywhere. He wasn't leaving. Day after day, he stayed, even when it seemed like all they wanted was for him to fail. It wasn't just the kids who were testing him. The town too had its share of doubts. People would whisper behind his back, questioning his motives. A man like him, living alone, unmarried, and suddenly deciding to take in 20 children, especially children of another race, must have had some hidden agenda. Some said he was crazy. Others wondered if he was doing it for attention or to somehow make himself feel better. Michael heard the whispers, but he chose not to respond. He didn't owe anyone an explanation. He had made his choice, and he would stand by it, no matter what anyone else thought. Then, one night, something changed. It was a night like any other, quiet and still, with only the soft glow of the moonlight casting its light over the house. Michael was sitting in his room, reading a book, when a soft sound broke through the silence. A quiet cry, almost imperceptible but unmistakable. He stood up and walked down the hallway, following the sound to one of the bedrooms. When he opened the door, he found Samuel curled up on the bed, his body trembling. The boy didn't realize Michael was standing in the doorway, and for a moment, Michael just watched. Samuel was whispering in his sleep, his words barely audible but full of desperation. "Please don't leave me. I'll be good." Michael felt a sharp pang in his chest. He walked quietly into the room and sat down beside Samuel. The boy jolted awake, his eyes wide with panic. For a moment, he froze, fear written all over his face. But instead of reacting the way the other children had, shouting at him to leave or pushing him away, Samuel simply stayed silent. Tears began to roll down his cheeks, and Michael could see the raw fear in the boy's eyes. Without saying a word, Michael gently placed a hand on Samuel's shoulder and pulled the blanket up around him. He didn't rush, didn't try to make everything better in an instant. He just sat there silently, offering his presence. Then, in a soft, calm voice, he said, "You're safe now. No one's going to leave you. I promise." For the first time since entering that house, Samuel didn't feel so alone. He didn't say anything else. He just nodded and closed his eyes again, trusting the warmth and comfort that Michael had offered. Michael stayed by his side until the boy's breathing slowed and became even, before quietly leaving the room. The next morning, things felt different. There was a subtle shift in the atmosphere of the house. When Michael entered the kitchen, he saw Sophia sitting at the table, eating breakfast quietly. Her usual distant demeanor had softened just a little, and she didn't shy away when he looked at her. Daniel, too, no longer wore the defiant look he always had. He didn't challenge Michael with his usual sharp words. Instead, he looked at him and simply nodded. And Samuel, who had been so scared and distrustful the night before, looked up at Michael with those wide, hopeful eyes and said, "Good morning." It was just 3 simple words, but for Michael, it was a breakthrough. It was the first sign that he was slowly but surely gaining their trust. The road ahead would still be long, and there would be many more challenges, but that morning, Michael knew something had changed. The children hadn't opened up completely, not yet, but for the first time, one of them had let him in. And for Michael, that was a beginning. That evening, the small kitchen of the house was filled with the warm aroma of cooking. Michael stood before the stove, his hands deftly stirring a large pot of soup, the steam rising and fogging up his glasses. He glanced around where the children had gathered into small groups, their laughter echoing through the room. Gone were the cold silences of the early days, replaced by the soft buzz of chatter. No more were their eyes filled with suspicion or invisible walls of distance. They were now arguing over trivial matters, fighting for seats near the stove because that spot was the warmest. Some even eagerly jumped onto chairs to peer into the pot, their eyes shining with curiosity. "Are you sure you know how to cook?" Daniel asked, tilting his head with a skeptical tone, but his gaze was no longer as cold as it used to be. "Wait and see," Michael replied, raising an eyebrow challengingly. The long dining table was set neatly, though it still carried the chaos of a large family. The mismatched porcelain bowls, a few old spoons, all arranged with careful attention. When Michael set the pot of soup down in the center of the table, the children cheered as if this were a real feast. Sophia, the girl who had always been quiet, was the first to pick up a spoon and take a small sip. A momentary look of surprise crossed her face, then her expression softened, and her eyes grew gentle. "It's really good," she whispered, so quietly that it seemed no one would hear. But Michael heard it, and that simple sentence was enough to choke him up. Laughter grew louder as the meal continued. Jacob began telling an old story from the orphanage days, making the whole table burst into laughter. Ethan and Samuel fought over the last piece of bread, but in the end, Ethan quietly pushed it toward Samuel. That small gesture went unnoticed by most, but Michael saw it all. He didn't say anything, just silently soaked in the miraculous moment, how a family was slowly but surely forming. As the meal drew to a close, Daniel, the one who had always been the most skeptical of Michael, suddenly spoke up. "You're not bad at cooking," he said, quickly looking down to hide the small smile that tugged at the corner of his lips. Michael didn't respond, just smiled softly, a rare smile full of emotion. He looked around the table at the small faces that had once been strangers, once marked by hurt, but now laughing and playing without a care in the world. In that moment, he realized that he had truly become a part of them, and they had accepted him, not just as a protector, but as a father. The meal stretched on longer than usual, with no one in a hurry to leave, as if they all wanted to hold on to the warmth of the family they had unconsciously longed for all this time. The darkness enveloped the room, with only the gentle sound of the wind whispering through the cracks of the window, creating soft, mysterious whispers from the night. Michael drifted into a deep sleep after a long day, but his mind was far from peaceful. In his dream, he found himself standing in an empty room, the walls cloaked in thick darkness. A worn wooden door in front of him slowly creaked open, and from the shadows, a small child emerged. The tiny body trembled, and a soft voice broke the silence, filled with desperation. "Father." The call echoed throughout the space, sending a chill down Michael's spine. He tried to focus on the child's face, but each time it stepped closer, the darkness consumed every feature. Michael reached out, wanting to touch, but the distance between them kept growing, stretching endlessly. "Who are you?" he whispered, but the child continued to call, "Father." The voice distorted, reverberating in his head like an echo from a distant past. Michael jolted awake, his breath quick and shallow, his forehead damp with cold sweat. In the darkness of the room, his chest felt heavy, as though crushed by an invisible stone. It had only been a dream, but why did it unsettle him so much? This feeling was different from a typical nightmare. It was so vivid it made him feel as though he had missed something important. He ran a hand across his face, trying to calm himself, but the echo of the voice still lingered in his mind. Unable to fall back asleep, Michael sat up and slowly made his way to the old bookshelf in the corner of the room. He opened a drawer and pulled out a small, weathered wooden box, its surface darkened with age. His fingers brushed lightly over the lid, but then he hesitated. Inside, there was a letter, an old letter he had kept for 10 years but never dared to open. His heart began to race, each beat heavy like a warning bell. He knew what was inside could change everything, but was he truly ready to face the truth? Michael clenched his fist, his fingers gliding over the smooth wood, feeling the scratches of time. For a moment, he considered opening it, but then stopped. Perhaps it wasn't the right time. He placed the box back into its spot, slowly closing the drawer as if fearing that if he were to close it too quickly, the truth inside would spill out and consume him. But what he didn't know was that no matter how long he hesitated, fate would still find a way to bring the truth to light. And when that happened, no one could stop it. Late into the night, the house was engulfed in silence, with only the soft whisper of the wind gently passing through the window. The children had fallen into a deep sleep, but Daniel was wide awake. He wasn't the type to accept things without questioning them. Over the past months, he had observed Michael carefully. The way he treated the children, how he always tried to be close, but had moments of quiet contemplation full of mystery. Above all, there was something about him that felt off, a feeling that Daniel couldn't quite name, but it lingered in his mind. Tonight was no different. As Daniel walked past Michael's study, the door was slightly ajar. A faint light from the desk lamp still flickered, casting long streaks across the wooden floor. He hesitated for a moment, then decided to enter. The room smelled faintly of old books and musty wood, a space that felt warm but also held an air of mystery. His eyes swept over the bookshelves, the desk, then paused on a drawer that was slightly open. Instinct told him there was something important inside. Daniel gently pulled the drawer open and immediately saw it. A worn wooden box with intricate carvings that had faded over the years. His heart raced as he lifted the box, feeling the coolness of the aged wood beneath his fingers. He opened it, and instantly his eyes were drawn to a yellowed letter resting inside. Daniel hesitated for a moment, but curiosity won over. He carefully unfolded the letter, the faint glow of the desk lamp illuminating the words on the page. But as he read the first line, his body seemed to freeze. Michael, one of them is your child. Daniel held his breath, his eyes glued to the words as if trying to engrave them into his mind. One of the children was Michael's biological child. He swallowed hard, a wave of dizziness washing over him like a crashing tide. Had Michael kept this secret all this time? He had raised all of them, but hid a truth that could change everything. He gripped the letter tightly, feeling a whirlwind of emotions: anger, confusion, and fear. One of the 20 children was Michael's own flesh and blood, but which one? He glanced around the room, feeling like the walls were closing in. If this was true, what did it mean? Did Michael truly care about all of them, or was he simply searching for his biological child? The question spiraled in Daniel's mind, but one thing was certain. This was a secret too big to stay hidden forever. And now that he knew the truth, there was no guarantee the others wouldn't discover it soon. What should he do? Confront Michael immediately, or stay silent and figure out which child was the mysterious one? Daniel stepped back, his hand still trembling. He placed the letter back in the box, closed the lid, and returned it to its place in the drawer. But no matter how much he tried to close the box, the truth inside had already burrowed deep into his mind, and he knew from that moment on, nothing would ever be the same again. That afternoon, the house was thick with a suffocating tension that no one could escape. The golden sunlight spilled through the large window, casting long, quiet shadows on the floor, but none of the 20 children sitting around the room could be bothered to notice the beauty. Their eyes were all on one man, Michael Evans. The air was charged, thick with anticipation, and it was impossible to ignore. Daniel stood trembling with fury, the crumpled letter gripped tightly in his hand. His face was flushed red, his fists shaking as they tightened around the paper. He had come to a breaking point, and he wasn't about to let it go anymore. I found it. Daniel's voice cut through the room, sharp as a blade. The words hit the silence like a thunderclap, and the room froze. Michael stiffened, already knowing what was coming. He didn't need to look. He had known this moment would arrive. This letter. Daniel raised it high, his eyes blazing with raw anger. How long were you going to hide this, huh? How long were you going to keep us in the dark, Michael? How long were you going to pretend to be something you're not? His voice rose with each word, every syllable laced with contempt. You think we're blind? You think we didn't notice? The other children exchanged uneasy glances, their confusion turning into disbelief. Daniel's fury was like an electric current that had jolted the whole room to life. They were witnessing something they never imagined could happen. A few of them were already crying. Others were shaking in anger, unable to process what Daniel was revealing. Michael's gaze shifted downward. He could already feel the weight of their stares. The silence of the room was deafening. He didn't want this. He never wanted this. But Daniel wasn't going to let him off the hook. Daniel stepped forward, his face twisted in contempt. So what now, Michael? You going to keep lying to us? What do you call this? What the hell is this? He slammed the letter onto the table, his breath ragged, trying to control the rage coursing through him. Is this how it's going to be? One of us is your biological child, right? That's the truth, isn't it? That's the reason you brought us all here, isn't it? The words came out like daggers, piercing the tension that had been slowly building up inside each one of them. Michael stood frozen. His hands were trembling, but he couldn't look away. The truth was already pouring out of Daniel like a torrent. Daniel didn't give him a second to breathe. You never cared about us. Daniel spat, his voice venomous. Not really. You just wanted to find your damn kid. We were just the leftovers, the filler in your sick little plan. We were nothing more than a means to an end. We weren't people to you. We were just pawns in your twisted game. Every word hit Michael like a hammer. It felt like his chest was being crushed under the weight of his guilt. He wanted to scream, to deny everything, but his voice was stuck in his throat. For a moment, he couldn't breathe. Daniel's eyes were filled with rage, and the others were no better. Ethan stood up, face contorted in fury, his voice hoarse with anger. You used us. You think we're too stupid to see that? He screamed. We trusted you. We believed you were trying to make a family, but you just wanted us to fill the damn void until you found what you were really looking for. You disgust me. Sophia, silent for so long, now broke into a gut-wrenching sob. Her small frame trembled as she wailed. I thought you loved us. I thought you cared. The words barely escaped her lips before she was drowning in her own tears, her face pale and streaked with sorrow. Daniel turned back to Michael, his voice lowering, becoming icy cold. I was a fool to believe in you, he hissed. You were never a father to us. You're a selfish man who couldn't even be honest with himself, let alone with us. You're just trying to fix your broken past by playing God with us. The venom in his voice was sharp enough to cut through steel. Michael stood there paralyzed. The weight of Daniel's words, the anger from the children, it all bore down on him. He wanted to defend himself, to explain that it wasn't like this, that they didn't understand, but he couldn't. Not anymore. His mouth was dry, and his throat constricted as if he were choking on the very truth he had been hiding. Daniel, with disgust in his eyes, took a step back. You're not our father, he spat. You're nothing but a coward who couldn't even face the truth about himself. So stop pretending you're anything more than that. And with that, the final blow was delivered. Michael's world came crashing down. He was left standing in the middle of the room, completely broken. His eyes stung with shame, but he refused to let the tears fall. The room was silent except for the sobs of the children, the realization setting in that the one thing they had been craving, true love, acceptance, family, had never really existed for them. Michael's heart was heavy with regret, but there was no turning back. He had made the choice, and now he had to live with the consequences. The trust he had spent 10 years trying to build was shattered, and the broken pieces could never be put back together. The house, once filled with laughter, was now shrouded in a terrifying silence. There were no more warm meals shared around the table, no more playful jokes exchanged. The air felt heavy, as if the entire house had been swallowed by a storm that no one could escape. Michael sat alone in the living room, his tired eyes staring out of the window. Outside, the children had split into two distinct groups. Some gathered in the corner of the room, faces twisted in anger, while others sat quietly, avoiding his gaze. Daniel was the angriest of them all. He paced back and forth across the room, not bothering to hide the fury in his voice. I told you he never really cared about us. We were nothing more than a side note, just invisible shadows next to the one child he truly wanted to find. The others nodded in agreement, their eyes filled with deep hurt. Ethan crossed his arms over his chest, his voice bitter. We were stupid for ever trusting him. I'd rather live on the streets than be part of this game. On the other side of the room, Samuel kept his head down, his hands clenched so tightly that his knuckles were white. He didn't speak, but inside, his heart twisted in pain. Not all of them felt the same way as Daniel and Ethan. Sophia, the surest of the group, glanced up at Michael, then quickly lowered her gaze, too afraid to say what was on her mind. She wanted to believe that Michael truly loved them. She remembered the nights he read to them, the times he carefully bandaged their wounds when they fell. But now, as everyone else turned their backs on him, Sophia didn't have the courage to defend him. She was too scared to stand up for him. Michael inhaled deeply, desperately trying to find something to say, something to explain, but every word seemed pointless. He understood why the children felt betrayed. He understood the pain in their hearts because he was hurting just as much. You have every right to be angry. He finally spoke, his voice low but weary. But if you think I took you in just because one of you is my biological child, then you're wrong. Then why the hell did you do it? Daniel shot back, his voice filled with raw pain. You could have adopted one. You could have found your biological child and left. But instead, you brought all of us here only to make us feel like we're worthless. Michael met Daniel's gaze, but he couldn't offer an explanation that would heal the wound. He had hoped that his love would be enough to make up for the truth, but now he realized that some wounds couldn't be healed with affection alone. A few children stood up and left the room without a word. Their heavy footsteps echoed in the silence, the doors slamming shut like a declaration. What they had once had as a family was now shattered beyond repair. In the corner of the room, Samuel remained seated, his eyes filled with conflict. He wanted to believe in what Michael had said, but as he looked around, as he saw his siblings leaving with anger in their eyes, he began to question. Was his faith in Michael a mistake? The house, once alive with the sounds of laughter and bustling footsteps, now felt eerily empty. The silence weighed heavily on every corner, as if the very walls had absorbed the pain of abandonment. The warmth and joy that once filled the space were gone, replaced by an oppressive stillness. Michael sat alone on the old wooden chair in the living room, his gaze dull and lost, staring at nothing. The front door still hung ajar, swaying ever so slightly, as if holding on to the last traces of warmth left behind by the children who had just walked out. Some had left carrying with them nothing but anger. Others, while not filled with hatred, didn't know how to face him anymore. They no longer trusted him, and that truth, no matter how hard he tried to accept it, twisted painfully in his chest. He stood up slowly, his legs feeling heavy, drained of strength, as he made his way to the study. The room was now as empty as his heart, yet his mind echoed with the voices of the children, those small voices he had spent 10 years loving and protecting. He looked over at the old wooden cabinet where the secret that had haunted him for years was hidden. There was no longer any reason to avoid it. He opened the drawer, carefully lifting the wooden box and placing it on the table. His fingers trembled as he opened the box, this time without hesitation. The letter was still there, the letter he had never found the courage to read again. He gently unfolded it, and as soon as his eyes scanned the familiar words, they felt like daggers, each line cutting deeper into his heart. Michael, if you're reading this letter, it means I'm no longer here. I'm sorry I couldn't stay, but there is something you need to know. We have a child. The child was sent to the orphanage right after I passed away. I know this is cruel, but I had no other choice. You couldn't adopt our child right away, and so the child grew up without knowing its roots. But if you ever come back, please find them, Michael. Let them know they were never abandoned. The words blurred in the dim light. Michael's heart pounded, but not from surprise. He had known this for a long time, but reading it again, feeling every word pierce him anew, left him unable to hold back the overwhelming pain in his chest. 10 years ago, he had returned to the orphanage to find his child, but nothing had been as simple as he had imagined. He had no information, no name, no identifying marks. The child could have been anyone among the hundreds of orphans at that time. And Michael had made the biggest mistake of his life. He couldn't choose just one, so he chose them all. He adopted 20 children, hoping that one of them would carry his blood. But as the years passed, he stopped searching. He had truly loved all of them, had seen them as his own. But now, as the truth was exposed in the worst possible way, everything he had worked for over a decade had turned to ashes. Michael lowered his head, his hands clutching the letter as though trying to crush it. He had failed. He had tried to do the right thing, but in the end, he had only made everything worse. Now he had not only lost the trust of the 20 children, but he might never find the child he had been searching for. One of them belonged to him, but now they had all turned away. Outside, the wind howled, rattling the window panes. Michael closed his eyes, letting despair consume him. He had once believed that love could erase the past, but perhaps there were mistakes that could never be undone. The storm came without warning, the sky swallowed by thick, dark clouds signaling something ominous. That day, the children were still angry, still distant from Michael. No one spoke to him, no one looked at him the way they once did, with the eyes of a father. But then an event occurred, an event that would change everything. Samuel was the only one who hadn't left the house completely. Though he no longer spoke to Michael, he had chosen to stay, often quietly sitting by the window, staring outside. That afternoon, he decided to go for a walk, perhaps to breathe the fresh air, or perhaps just to escape the suffocating atmosphere of the house. No one realized that this would be the last time they would see him leave the house seemingly calm. The screeching sound of brakes pierced the heavy silence of the gloomy afternoon, followed by a crash so loud it felt as though the ground itself was shaking. The remaining children inside the house jumped to their feet, rushing to the door. Outside, on the road in front of the gate, Samuel lay motionless, blood staining the street. A truck was stopped in the middle of the road, the driver trembling as he stepped out, his face drained of all color. Everything happened too fast. Sophia screamed in panic. Ethan ran to Samuel's side, desperately shaking him, but there was no response. "Call an ambulance. Hurry," Daniel shouted, his voice frantic. For the first time in days, his anger was no longer aimed at Michael. But the horror that awaited them at the hospital was far worse. "The boy has severe internal injuries. We need to operate immediately, but there's a problem." The doctor emerged from the emergency room, his face grim. All the children stood crowded together outside, too worried to speak. "He needs a bone marrow transplant to have a chance of surviving," the doctor continued, his voice firm. "But finding a suitable donor will take a long time, and the surgery is expensive. If we don't have the money immediately, we can't proceed." The room seemed to collapse around them. The children exchanged looks, fear written all over their faces. Samuel couldn't die. He was part of their family. But how could they possibly come up with such a large sum of money in such a short amount of time? Michael stepped forward. "Test me." His voice was deep and unwavering. "I'll be the donor." The children looked up, their eyes wide with shock. Michael didn't hesitate, not for a second. The doctor hesitated briefly but then nodded, signaling for a nurse to prepare for testing. As they went about the preparations, Michael turned to face the children, who were silent and still. "As for the cost," he continued, as if making the most important decision of his life, "I'll take care of it, by any means necessary." He left the hospital immediately. No one knew what he was going to do, but 2 hours later, Michael returned empty-handed, without house keys, without anything of value left on him. "What did you do?" Daniel asked, his voice trembling. Michael looked straight into the boy's eyes, no regret in his gaze. "I sold the house." The noise in the hospital corridor came to an abrupt halt. The children stood frozen, unable to believe what they had just heard. He had sold the house, the only home they had, to save Samuel. Sophia brought her hand to her mouth, tears streaming down her face. Ethan clenched his fists tightly, but this time it wasn't anger that filled him. It was something else, a sense of being humbled by a sacrifice they could never have imagined. Michael simply smiled gently. "I don't need the house, but I need you." No one said anything. But in that moment, all the misunderstandings, all the anger, all the resentment they had been holding on to, came crashing down. And they all realized the truth they had been denying for so long. Michael had never seen them as strangers. He truly loved them, like a real father. The hospital room was chillingly silent, the only sound the steady beeping of the heart monitor. The children stood crowded together outside the door, their eyes fixed on the operating room, where where Samuel was fighting for his life. No one spoke, no one dared to move, as if any small noise could shatter everything. After everything that had happened, no one cared anymore whether Michael was the biological father of any of them. They just wanted Samuel to live. Time dragged on. Each minute felt like an eternity. Then, finally, the operating room door swung open. A doctor stepped out, removing his mask, his face showing the exhaustion of a long and grueling surgery, but his eyes still held a flicker of hope. The surgery was successful. The boy will recover. A collective sigh of relief escaped from the children. Sophia burst into tears, throwing herself into Ethan's arms. Daniel clenched his fists, as if trying to hold back the overwhelming emotions rising within him. But the doctor wasn't finished. He looked toward Michael, his eyes filled with understanding. "We have the results of your bone marrow test," he continued, his voice slow and deliberate. "And there's something you need to know." The hallway fell into a deadly silence. The children stopped crying, every eye now trained on the doctor. He took a deep breath before delivering the next words. Words that would change everything forever. "Mr. Evans, Samuel is your biological son." No one breathed. For a moment, all sounds around them seemed to vanish. The world felt like it slowed down, and all that remained was the shock that washed over everyone in that room. Michael stood frozen, his eyes wide, his hand gripping the armrest as if to make sure he wasn't dreaming. Samuel, his biological son? The weakest child in the group, the one he had always felt a strange connection to, turned out to be the child he had been searching for all these years. Daniel was the first to step back, but not out of anger. He didn't know how to process the emotions surging inside him. For all this time, he had thought that Michael had adopted all of them just to find his biological child. But now, in this moment, he realized the truth. Michael had never treated any of them differently. He had loved them all as his own. Ethan looked down at the floor, a wave of regret washing over him. He had once said he'd rather live on the streets than be adopted by a man like Michael. But now he realized how wrong he had been. Sophia was still crying, but not with the pain of the past. These were tears of awakening, tears of a love she had denied for so long. Michael clenched his fist, took a deep breath, and turned to face the children standing around him. Now he knew who his biological child was, but did it even matter anymore? He looked into the eyes of each of them, the children he had spent a decade protecting, nurturing, loving. They were all his children, and no matter what, his love for them had never changed. For the first time, Daniel stepped forward and embraced him, a true embrace, without doubt, without blame. And like a chain reaction, one by one, the others followed. Sophia, Ethan, Jacob, Chloe, they all gathered around him. A single embrace that erased all misunderstandings, all distance, all the hurt from the past. Outside, the first light of dawn began to break. Today, they hadn't just found a father again. They had found a real family. The rain fell steadily, its soft patter against the hospital roof echoing like a quiet lament. Drops of water pooled in the gutters, reflecting the dim street lights in the darkness. The house had lost its heart. When Samuel woke after the surgery, the children gathered around him, gripping his hand tightly, tears of regret streaming down their faces. But there was one person who wasn't there. Michael was gone. Daniel was the first to notice something was wrong. After a sleepless night by Samuel's side, he returned to the house they once called home. But when he stepped inside, the house was empty. There were no familiar footsteps of Michael, no comforting scent of coffee in the mornings, no sign of the man who used to sit in the old armchair. On the kitchen table, there was a letter, neatly placed. The handwriting was strong but slightly trembling, as though the writer had struggled for a long time before putting pen to paper. "My dear children, by the time you read these words, I will have gone. Not because I wanted to abandon you, but because I understand I have hurt you too much. I adopted you all hoping to redeem myself, but I never wanted you to feel like you were substitutes. You are not a temporary choice, nor are you just the leftovers of my life. You are my family, my children, whom I love with all my heart. But I was wrong, and that mistake has cost me the most important thing, you. Live well. Protect each other. Don't look for me. Don't waste any more time on a man who has caused you this much pain. I love you, but perhaps it's time for me to leave." The letter ended there, but the pain it left behind had no end. Sophia burst into tears, her small hands clutching the paper as if she could keep Michael from leaving by holding on to it. Ethan slammed his fist against the wall, his anger and regret swelling inside him. Daniel just stood there, his hands shaking, feeling like the world had crumbled beneath him. His whole life, he had never trusted adults, had always been wary of Michael. But just when he realized Michael truly loved them, that man was gone. Had they really lost him? No, this couldn't be how it ended. Daniel looked up, his eyes burning with determination. We have to find him. The group began a frantic search. No one knew where Michael had gone, but they knew one thing. He had nowhere to go. He had sold the house, had no possessions left. A man like that, where would he go? Ethan drove the old truck Michael had used to take them on their outings. They scoured every road, asked every acquaintance, searched for any clue, no matter how small. But Michael had left no trace. He had vanished like the wind. They went to the orphanage where Michael had once adopted them. No one had seen him. They went to bus stations, train depots, hoping to find that familiar figure among strangers, but nothing. The more they searched, the deeper the fear grew in their hearts. Daniel, who had always been the strongest, could no longer hide the panic in his eyes. What if we can't find him? The question hung in the air in the dead of night, a question no one dared to answer. Sophia clenched her fists. We'll find him, she said, her voice soft but certain. Because he never abandoned us. So this time, we won't abandon him. No one knew how long this journey would take, but they all understood one thing. They couldn't let Michael go like this. And no matter where it led, no matter how long it took, they would bring their father back. The autumn wind swept through the trees, causing golden leaves to fall softly onto the narrow path leading to an old retirement home on the outskirts of town. Daniel wasn't sure why he had stopped the truck here. They had searched everywhere, from bus stations to train depots to cheap motels, but Michael seemed to have vanished without a trace. With each passing day, their worry grew. But as the old truck slowly rolled down the leaf-strewn road, an unfamiliar sensation crept into Daniel's chest. Daniel stepped out of the truck, his eyes drifting to the simple sign hanging on the rusty gate. Hope Haven Retirement Home. He couldn't understand why his feet instinctively moved toward the entrance. The retirement home wasn't large, but it had a warm and peaceful feel to it. The soft songs of birds filled the air, with a few elderly people sitting under the porch, some gazing into the distance, while others chatted and laughed with the young volunteers. And then Daniel saw him. Michael stood in the corner of the yard, wearing a simple shirt, holding a cup of hot tea, gently adjusting a blanket for an elderly woman. He didn't notice Daniel standing there. His face still held the same kindness as it always had. But there was something different, perhaps a deep sorrow, or perhaps the serene acceptance of someone who had decided to let go of everything. Daniel's heart tightened. Was this where he went after leaving them? After everything, Michael hadn't chosen some distant place to hide. He chose to return to the people who needed love, people forgotten just like the children at the orphanage once were. He had no home, no possessions, but he was still here, using his remaining years to care for others. Michael stood still, his hand gently resting on the frail shoulder of the elderly woman he had just covered with a blanket. For a moment, he wasn't sure if he was awake or dreaming. There before him was Daniel, his eyes aflame with emotions that had been buried for so long. And behind him, one by one, the other children stepped into the yard. Sophia, Ethan, Jacob, Chloe. They were all there. No one said a word in that moment. Only the autumn breeze whispered softly through the trees, carrying the fresh, cool scent of fallen leaves and an undeniable feeling of vulnerability that hung in the air. Daniel was the first to move. His feet felt as though they had a life of their own, carrying him forward. The weight of everything he had carried for so long now pushed him to the ground. He knelt before Michael, his hands trembling, his voice cracking as it broke the heavy silence. "I'm sorry," he said, his words thick with emotion, far more than simple words could convey. "I've said things I shouldn't have said. I've doubted you. I didn't trust you, even though you were always there for us." His head bowed low, as though the weight of his words and the regret they carried could only be truly felt through his actions. For a moment, Michael stood frozen, unable to fully comprehend what was happening. But then, one by one, the others knelt too. Sophia, whose eyes were filled with tears, spoke through sobs. "We were wrong. We never understood. We thought you only cared about one of us, but we were wrong. She gasped for breath, trying to steady herself. You loved all of us, not because of who we were, but because of who we are. Because we're family. The words cut through Michael, and as he looked at each of them, Ethan, Jacob, Chloe, their faces streaked with tears, their shoulders trembling. He felt an overwhelming rush of love and sorrow. Daniel, still kneeling, looked up at him, eyes wide with guilt, his voice trembling with an honesty that Michael had never heard before. I was angry. I was confused. I didn't understand. But now I do. He swallowed hard, his voice quieter but filled with desperation. I don't deserve forgiveness. But if you can, please come back to us. Please. Michael's chest tightened. The last 10 years, every sacrifice, every tear, all the love he had given suddenly, it all felt worth it. He had never expected this. Never imagined that the children he had loved so dearly, the children he had thought he had lost, would now return to him with open hearts. Michael's hands trembled as he took a step forward, moving toward Daniel first. He knelt down in front of him, pulled him into his arms, holding him so tightly that for a moment he couldn't tell where his pain ended and Daniel's began. Never, ever did I blame you, Michael whispered, his voice choked with emotion. Never. I just wanted you to know that I loved you. All of you. With all my heart. Daniel, his face buried in Michael's chest, sobbed uncontrollably, the years of anger, confusion, and pain slowly draining from his body. One by one, Michael embraced them all, Sophia, Ethan, Jacob, Chloe. He held each of them tightly, as if to say, you are mine. You have always been mine. The tears that fell were not just for the loss of time, not just for the mistakes they had made, but for the love that had always been there, hidden beneath the surface of their resentment. Sophia wiped her tears, her hands trembling as she reached up to touch Michael's cheek. We thought you didn't want us anymore, that we weren't enough, she whispered, her voice broken but full of gratitude. But you never gave up on us. Not even for a second. Michael smiled, his eyes brimming with tears as he kissed the top of her head. You were never too much for me, he said, his voice full of tenderness. And you never will be. The wind had picked up, swirling the leaves around their feet, but none of them moved. The world around them seemed to stop for a moment, as if it too was giving them this time, this moment to heal. Daniel pulled away from Michael for a moment, looking up at him with a mixture of guilt and newfound understanding. I thought. Daniel paused, his voice quieter now. I thought you'd abandoned us, that you didn't care. But now I see you've always been here. Michael placed his hands on Daniel's shoulders, looking him in the eyes. I've never left you, he said, his voice steady though filled with emotion. I may have made mistakes, but I never left you. I was always here, waiting for you to see me, to see what we have together. In the distance, the sun began to set, casting a warm, golden light over the grounds of the retirement home. The autumn sky painted the world in hues of orange and pink, and for the first time in a long while, Michael felt truly at peace. The children, once so lost in their own pain, now stood together, the love they had been yearning for finally filling the spaces between them. There was no more anger, no more fear, just the unspoken promise that no matter what happened, they would always be a family. Michael, the man who had given so much of himself, finally understood that the family he had been searching for wasn't just a dream. It was here, with him, in the hearts of the children who had once rejected him. And in that moment, he knew they had found each other once again. Michael walked slowly into the old house, a place that once held so many memories. Even though he had sold it to save Samuel, the children had come together to buy it back, turning it into a home once more, a place where they all truly belonged. As the door creaked open, the familiar scent of wood filled the air, and the soft rays of the evening sun filtered through the windows, casting a warm glow over every corner of the room. The family pictures were still on the walls, and the scuff marks on the floor from the children's playful running hadn't faded. No one spoke, but they all understood. This was their home. Ethan ran into the living room, pulling out an old ball and tossing it into the air as if trying to reclaim the peaceful days they had once shared. Sophia placed a bouquet of flowers on the dining table, where they had once shared many laughter-filled dinners. Daniel, once the most skeptical, quietly placed Michael's letter back into the drawer, but this time not to hide it, but to remind himself that family isn't defined by blood, it's defined by real love. Michael stood at the doorway, watching the children joyfully rearranging everything, his heart overwhelmed with emotion. This wasn't just a house. It was a family, a place where lost souls had found each other and created an unbreakable bond. He smiled, stepping inside, knowing that this time he would never feel alone again. That evening, the kitchen once again filled with the familiar scent of the soup Michael used to make. He stood at the stove, rolling up his sleeves just as he had done countless times before. But this time, there were no skeptical glances, no doubt, only warmth, trust, and genuine smiles. Daniel was the first to speak once they all sat down at the table. "I think we've forgotten something important." He cleared his throat, looking around the table before continuing. "Thank you, Dad, for not abandoning us, even when we hurt you." The room fell into a brief silence. Michael sat down his spoon, looking at each of the children, his eyes filled with emotion. He never expected these words, but hearing them, he knew that all misunderstandings had been erased. He smiled softly, reaching for his own bowl of soup. "Well, if you're thanking me, you'd better finish your portions first," he teased, his voice light, but filled with a tenderness that couldn't be hidden. Laughter filled the air. For the first time in a long while, they truly felt at peace. The dinner lasted longer than usual, with no one rushing to leave, as if no one wanted to lose this moment. A few days later, Michael and the children gathered to discuss their future plans. He didn't just want to stop at taking care of them. He wanted to expand their home into a place where other orphan children could find the same warmth and love they had once found. Samuel, now healthier, squeezed Michael's hand and spoke quietly. "Dad, you found me, but I don't want to be the only one saved. We can save more children, can't we, Dad?" Michael looked at the boy, then at the others around him. A feeling of pride beyond words filled his heart. "Yes, Samuel," he nodded, "and we will do it together." The sun began to set behind the trees, casting a glorious orange light over the house. But this time, it wasn't a lonely light. It illuminated a family, a love, and a new journey that was just beginning. As this story comes to an end, I want to take a moment to thank each and every one of you for joining this emotional journey. Family isn't just about blood, it's about love, sacrifice, and the bonds we build through time. Michael's story reminds us that sometimes love finds us in the most unexpected ways, and forgiveness has the power to heal even the deepest wounds. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss another incredible journey like this. Your support means the world to us, and together we can continue sharing stories that inspire, move, and remind us of the beauty of humanity. Thank you for watching, and see you in the next story.